Greetings, kings and queens. Greetings, greetings, greetings. One God, one aim, one destiny. You are in tune to the Forward March show with myself, Shakara. And Chief Fode is not on screen, but he is definitely here. Say hi to the people there, Chief Fode.
Yes, greetings, family. Greetings, greetings, greetings. Welcome back for our second episode of Forward March. Yes. Sorry I
They are.
can't be on
They are.
screen, but I might be on screen a little later. Right now, as you know, in Freetown, we have these electricity blackouts. So we're dealing with that right now, but I was prepared. I wouldn't miss this show for anything. This is the topic of the world right now. And I
Yeah.
believe that this brother who we got coming, man, brother Kwame Pianki, he's about to really, really, really provide us with some expert analysis from a Pan-African perspective. So I'm good. I'm happy to be here, bro.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. You know, Chief Fode, like it looked like the forces of COINTELPRO are working there because this is the same situation that happened last week.
Yeah, it happened last week as well, but it was I was able to manage it last time. I don't
Yeah,
know what's
yeah,
going
yeah.
on recently.
No, that's that guy, you know. That's that guy. The challenges of the now, but we're gonna make it through same way, Kings and Queens. You know what I'm saying? But how is it? What's what is Sierra Leone saying right now, Chief Fode? I know that just before we get into our main topic, we know that there's a significant anniversary approaching, and you are central, yeah, to the organizing of the events surrounding this anniversary. So what's happening on the ground?
Oh man. Oh well, there's what the government is doing. In Freetown City this week, they've been able to begin commemorating the founding of Freetown. So they're
Yes, yes.
honoring they're honoring the founders and just the history and everything like that. For those who don't know out there, March 11th, 1792 was 230 years ago to the day that we will now be opening up what we call the God's House International Clinic and
Mm-hmm.
Medical Missions here in Sierra Leone. We're doing it with a sister named Reverend Dr. Yvonne Washington Toure. She's
Mm-hmm.
a sister from the United States of America, and
Mm-hmm.
she's here right now on the ground. Currently, her and the other two doctors are doing an interview at Culture Radio here in town right now with Kenya. So, we're going to be going down to the cotton tree, the historic cotton tree, which is the location where our ancestors named this place Freetown, and the whole process began. We'll be down
Yes,
there. She'll be doing a prayer and a libation. I'll
yes,
be
sir.
giving a short talk on the historical evolution of Freetown,
Yes,
and
sir.
then we'll be going back to God's House International Clinic and launching our mission. So that's what we're doing. But there's other things happening, man. I know they're having symposiums, they're
Okay.
having different events. The government is organizing, but this is a great, 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 great day for us, for all of us Africans around the world. It represents the first time that we was formally able to return and settle ourselves to the point of settlement um, in history. So
Mhm, mhm.
it's great.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And so looking forward to hearing the reports from brothers and sisters because we know that brothers and sisters from the diaspora are going to be traveling to Sierra Leone and Liberia for this occasion. Brothers and sisters, if you're not aware, last week we had a beautiful conversation with our brother Putu from Liberia, and he was breaking down alongside us some understood, brother Kwame, some powerful information and delving into the history of Liberia and the history of Liberia as it relates to Garvey and Garveyism and so on. So that was a powerful conversation. I'm encouraging ones and ones to please go check that out. Yeah, go check that out and subscribe to Forward March. Yeah, subscribe to the channel. Share the link to this video far and wide. Yeah, share the link to this video throughout your networks far and wide. I guarantee you, this is going to be a powerful conversation. Yeah, a powerful conversation. We have as a guest somebody who I consider to be one of the most erudite political scientists, Pan-African, Black nationalist, Garveyite political scientists of our era. Yeah. And so we know that there's a lot taking place in the world, and sometimes it can be difficult. Yeah, it can be difficult to stay abreast of all of the information, and that's deliberate, kings and queens. But we have a brother who's very adept at doing that. And he's going to be sharing his information with us today. And we're going to have some conversation, and we're going to take your comments, your questions also. All right. So with that, let me just double check something. You know what I mean? You know, you got to check the things behind the scenes. And it's not, yeah, it's not happening right about now. So we're just going to bring our brother forward, and just say welcome. Yeah. Greetings and welcome to the man called Brother Kwame Pianki. Greetings, bro. We can't hear you, Brother
Hello,
Kwame. I'm
everybody. I
not
want to
sure
make sure there's
why.
no feedback.
Okay. Yeah, there's
Okay,
no
hold
feedback.
on.
There's no
Can you hear
feedback.
me
There might
now?
be, yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you. There might be a slight delay, but we can hear you.
Good.
So we'll work with the delay. All right, work with the delay.
Okay.
All right, family.
All right.
Wherever
No,
you're watching from,
no problem.
let us know when it's. Go ahead, bro.
No, I'm just trying to adjust some settings. That's all. Okay, go ahead. Keep on going.
Right, cool. So you want to make it. You know the technology. You know what I'm saying. We have to work with it sometimes. Yeah. All right. So
I
big
got it.
things are
I
going
got it now.
on.
That feels better.
Good. All right. Big
Good.
things are going on
Good.
in the world, kings and queens. Yeah. And we're gonna put this issue of Russia and Ukraine, or more properly, Russia and NATO, into Pan-African political contextuality. Yeah. That's what it's about today. All right. So, my brother Kwame Pianki, let's start at let's say the beginning, yeah, or as near to the beginning as is relevant to the now. All right. I was just teaching a
Yes.
group of students in the homeschool university, and I teach media studies, and so I
Mm.
was eliciting their impressions of what is taking place. Who are the bad guys and who are the good guys, and what is the reason for the conflict between Russia and Ukraine as it stands? From your perspective, from a Pan
Um.
African perspective, what is the reason for this conflict at the moment?
Well, let me take. Let's do the first part. There aren't necessarily any good guys in this from a Pan African perspective. We have
Right.
competitors, right? And
Mm,
you all are in the UNIA,
yes,
and
sir.
Marcus Garvey was very clear in
Yes,
talking
sir.
about that we have competition and we have
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
rivals. Sometimes
Yes, sir.
so ain't no good guys in this.
Yes, sir.
we've
Yes,
we've
sir.
we've walked into a Western town, and we're among many rivals. So, and
Yes, sir.
I'm going to take the beginnings of this crisis to 1904.
Okay.
In the UK, there was a man named Halford Mackinder who presented a
Right.
paper to the Royal Geographical Society called the Geographical Pivot of History.
Right.
And he made the argument that the future of global power lay not in Britain controlling the sea lanes, but in controlling the vast land mass called Euro-Asia. Right. So his map
Mm,
showed Africa, Asia, and Europe not as three separate continents, but as one landmass,
yes.
a world island.
Yes.
And it was control of this heartland that was the key to Britain staying on top and ruling
Okay.
the world at that time.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Right. If you have any questions, please keep on. I can pause.
Go ahead, bro. Break it down. Break it down.
So essentially, the key linchpin in the heartland of Eurasia was running from Germany all the way to China.
Mm,
And what Mackinder considered at the time was a pivot state of Russia in alliance with Germany would
mm,
basically marginalize the UK.
mm.
So this had to be stopped at all costs. And Britain essentially started two world wars. Yes, I said Britain started two world wars in order to prevent a German-Russian alliance.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And furthermore, Mackinder wrote the paper that basically outlined the creation of NATO.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, in 1940, I believe, or 1941, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
he said that almost of equal significance to the heartland was the Midland Ocean, consisting of the eastern half of Canada and the
Right.
United States, North Atlantic Basin, and its four subsidiaries: the Mediterranean, Baltic, Arctic and Caribbean seas, Britain and France. So
Hmm.
basically, Mackinder proposed NATO, and a geopolitical strategist, I believe a U.S. general, said once that the purpose of NATO is to keep Russia out and keep
Mm,
Germany in.
interesting. The purpose of NATO is to keep Russia out and to keep Germany in. This is a very interesting point, and it says a lot in terms of a lot of the geopolitical machinations that have been going on at the moment in recent years, including Brexit and so on and so forth. But we'll come back to that. I just want to check if Chief Foddy wants to add anything to this reasoning at the moment.
Oh yeah, it sounds like white tribalism to me, man. Um, you know,
Big time, big
anytime,
time.
big
Hmm.
time,
And
anytime
that
you're
that
talking
white
about,
trap. Keep on
yeah, I
going,
was
Chief
gonna say
O'Day.
that.
Keep on.
Okay, well, anytime that you're talking about Germany and Britain, you have to always remember in the historical context that the Anglo Saxons come from Germany. They're Germanic tribes.
Hmm.
And you
That's
have to
right.
also remember that the people in Eurasia or Russia are the ancient Mongols and the Huns. So these are on the surface level white people. That's what we would define them as. But we have
Hmm.
to dig a little deeper and start to give them the same kind of analysis they give us because this is ethnically driven. And what
Yeah,
you find in Ukraine is that Ukraine is the headquarters of global neo-Nazism,
right.
and
Great point. Great point.
it's
Yes.
so yeah. That's what I want to add so far.
All right,
Yeah.
we're going to get back to this Nazi point. Go ahead, brother Copy. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I'm gonna dovetail on what Chief O'Day said. If you go to World War One,
Hmm.
Kaiser Wilhelm was Kaiser Wilhelm on behalf of the German Junker class. Those are the landed wealth in Germany. They were
Hmm.
cutting too many deals with Russia. And what Britain feared was Germany's technical capability melded with Russia's resources.
Right,
And
right.
the German Junker class found a lot of commonality between them and what you would call the White Russians. The White Russians meaning Russian royalty or people
Yeah.
alive with Russian royalty, the czars, right?
Hmm.
So essentially, and there's a great book called Conjuring Hitler, and I'm going to show you the book here,
Yes, sir.
written by an economist named Guido Preparata.
Okay.
And basically, he has a lot of declassified information from British archival sources, German archival sources, and U.S. archival sources. So
Hmm.
basically, Britain used what was his name, Guido Principe, who killed King Ferdinand,
Hmm.
as a useful tool to force Germany's hand to go to war with them, because their whole purpose was to try to split Germany from Russia. So initially there was an alliance, but then Germany and Russia split as the Communist Party, as the communists took over Russia. And the
Yeah.
British guaranteed Lenin safe passage from England to Russia in order to have him installed as a communist leader. So, and again, a
Interesting.
lot of people are surprised about that, but the capitalists in the West have a lot of dealings with the Communist Party, and they have no problem dealing with communist parties all over the world.
And another subject for another time, my brother.
E-
We're
Exactly, and we could, and another time we could discuss that effect on the UNIA, but
definitely right.
that's time for
Right.
another story.
Now,
So
now,
now we
now
move
go,
on.
go ahead. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Mhm.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
And
Go
we
ahead.
move on to World War II.
Mm.
It's interesting that Hitler was an Anglophile.
Yes,
If you
sir.
read
Yes, sir.
Mein Kampf, Hitler absolutely adored the British royal family, and as you all in the UK know, that
Hmm.
Hitler had pretty good relationship with, who was it, King Edward at the time, who had to
Mm.
abdicate the throne, and
Mm.
Neville Chamberlain. And the funny
Yes.
thing about it, the history books make it seem like the British establishment disagreed with that um, approach or rapprochement with Hitler.
Hmm.
However, all of Chamberlain's cabinet went to Churchill's cabinet, so there was no disagreement.
Right.
Hitler would not have been elected without help from the UK
Hmm.
and help from the United States. And in fact, the Bush family were head of this bank called Union Guarantee Bank,
Yes.
who basically propped up the Nazi Party at the beginning of the
Hmm.
war. And Standard
Yeah.
Oil was still doing business with Hitler throughout the war.
Yes.
So, so you created this Anglophile, anti-communist, socialist to split with to continue that division with Russia.
Right, right, right.
So
Interesting,
the U.S.
interesting.
has the U.S. and UK have no problem dealing with Nazis
Not at all.
historically.
Yeah, not at all. Right. So this
They
is an
are
interest.
Nazis.
Great point. And
They're gonna
the
say
current well, Chief O'Day is absolutely right. The current head of the EU, her grandfather was a Nazi,
was a Nazi.
von Leyden. And
Yes, yes.
he was one of the high German officers responsible for the massacre of 30,000 Jews in Ukraine during World War
Mhm.
II. They were
Right,
shot in
right,
cold blood.
right.
So Chief O'Day is absolutely right.
So let's because that is a brilliant backstory, yeah, and I think we can there's so much more we can go into there, but for the sake of time, yeah, let's kind of bring
Yep.
it to the now in terms of this immediate situation, and what has caused it, yeah. What was it that precipitated Russia to invade the Ukraine? Is it just because
Well, this
Putin's a land grab, as they're telling us? I've heard comparisons between Putin and Hitler. I've heard that recently that he's another Hitler. Is that the case, my brother? Kwame?
well, I'm not in a Putin fan club, but Putin is a rational chess player.
Right, right.
And to say that he's a Hitler massacring citizens in his own border
Hmm.
would is a big time stretch,
Yes, sir. Yes,
if
sir.
you'd ask me.
Hmm.
But if you want to go to the direct roots of this crisis, it comes back with the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 90s. One of
Hmm.
the promises were made that NATO would not expand eastward. That promise was made by Bush's Secretary of State, James Baker.
Hmm.
Well, subsequent administrations, the Clinton, the Bush the Jr., the Obama administrations violated that agreement until
Yes, sir.
2014. The Obama administration, under the acting of Victoria Nuland, who is now in the Biden administration,
Hmm.
overthrew the government in the Ukraine and installed a puppet leader. And
Hmm.
her act of doing this was taped by the Russians. Her phone conversation was taped, and this was placed on YouTube. And her one of her assistants was saying, "Well, what about the EU if we overthrow Ukraine?" And Victoria Nuland basically said, "F the EU."
Hmm.
And when you say F the EU, that means F Germany, because as far as I'm concerned, Germany is the EU. The
Yes,
EU is Germany,
yes,
France
sir.
is a little brother, the
Yes, sir.
Scandinavian states, and the pigs countries as Germany's vassals. Because Germany uses it to send their goods cheaply, and Germany uses the pig states along the Eastern European countries as a source of cheap labor.
Hmm. Hmm.
So again,
We,
this was again a way to divide Germany and Russia.
right, right. So, I'm correct me if I'm wrong, brother Kwame, but it is my understanding that one of the principal reason, if not the principal reason, for the founding of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and that military alliance, yeah, between the Western
Mhm.
world, was to stem the growth of the Soviet Union, and Soviet Russia. Wasn't that not part of the program?
That is the public reason given, right?
Yes,
The
yes, sir.
real reason given was, one, to stem the growth of the Soviet Union, but
Hmm.
also to restrain Germany. Because
Right.
remember, Germany, even during the height of the Soviet Union days, was dependent on Russian natural gas and Russian oil, right?
Okay.
And I know a lot of the world fell into that communism versus capitalism thing in the 70s and 80s, but
Yes, sir.
the UK was facilitating Russian credits for sale of oil through Morgan Grenfell back from those
Mm,
days. So real
mm.
and number two, many Germans feel that they are occupied by the United States with all the US bases in
Yes, sir.
Germany. So
Yes, sir.
again, NATO is really to keep Germany and Russia from creating this
Big
heartland
time.
superpower that connects all the way to China.
You preempted my next question. Then maybe the answer to my next question, which was what is the purpose of NATO since the 1990s, which is the fall of the Soviet Union, and you've
Yeah.
more or less
Yeah.
answered that with basically to prevent Russia and Germany from creating a
Because think about it,
superpower.
with the fall of the Soviet Union, East Germany and West Germany reunited, and
Hmm.
of course, the U.S. government is very much an Anglophile government. If you read Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope, it's
Mm-hmm.
made very clear that the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the think tank in the United States for foreign policy and domestic policy,
Mm-hmm.
is a part of the British Roundtable Group, because the Council on Foreign Relations was started from money from the Cecil Rhodes Trust,
Right.
as was the British Roundtable Group. So
Mm-hmm.
they and furthermore, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was Carter's national security advisor, he was a foreign
Mm-hmm.
policy advisor to the Reagan administration, and he
Mm-hmm.
was Barack Obama's mentor. Wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard, saying again that he just all he did was rehash what Mackinder said, that they needed control the heartland,
Mm-hmm.
Eurasia, particularly
You said
Russia.
that. Yep. 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 All right. All right. Friday, you want to add anything in here? You're off screen, so I've
Yes,
got to keep
sir.
checking.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, man. I just
Go
wanted
ahead.
to I want to ask the brother Kwame, man. You know, I'm in the internet streets, so I'm listening very closely to the things that our people are saying about this situation. And
Mm,
one of the things that our people are saying, particularly within the Pan African discourse, is there seems to be a split between should we support Russia since they were not involved in the transatlantic slave trade? Should we support Russia because they have a history of directly or indirectly supporting national liberation struggles in Africa and throughout the so-called third world? I'm asking these questions on behalf of the people out there because I know they want to know. And then also, if you go back to the end of the Cold War, um, you had Boris Yeltsin, a complete traitor to the communist agenda.
hmm
And he pretty much took um, the USSR and put it in bed with the West in a way where he almost sabotaged the whole situation and ensured the end of the Cold War, that the West would end up on top. Now we talk about the European Union now, and we're
hmm
talking about the ex-Soviet Union then. And it seems like as the Soviet Union collapsed, that the West was emboldened and began to build this North Atlantic Trade Organization, began to prioritize using the UN to intervene in struggles all around the world that were pretty much fighting against imperialist, finance capitalism, corporate capitalism within their own
hmm
countries. And so when the Cold War ended, it left the rest of the people who were still engaged in their struggles without any kind of safety net, any kind of support, and kind of isolated. I think we're still there. So I want to ask you about that. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah. Yes, Russia seemed to support a lot of what you could say Pan African progressive leadership in the '60s. On the face of it, it seems like Kwame Nkrumah may, on the face of it, it may seem that Kwame Nkrumah was in the Russian camp, although he went out of his way to say he didn't want to be in either camp. And I think he was one of the creators of the non-aligned movement, right? I think if you look at Sekou Touré, that's the same. And you look at Patrice Lumumba, he probably leaned more into the Russian camp than most, but again, he wanted to have a third way. And of course, Cuba was totally in the Russian camp. Um, but what I also found interesting, Russia, to me, had a lot of economic dealings with South Africa during the height of the apartheid movement, even though Russia armed some of the rivals of the South African government. Excuse me here, I'm going to get the shade, but some of the rivals of the South African government, of course, Russia was heavily involved in Angola, and they were involved in Mozambique. But those wars against the apartheid government were basically won with Cuban support, right? So let's fast forward to 2011, 2012 in Libya, post-Soviet Union, right? Um, when the U.S. overthrew Gaddafi, Gaddafi had said previous to that he wanted to build an African dinar, a gold-backed dinar, gold-backed currency, uniting all of the African nations, and this would have collapsed the French colonial union.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the U.S. was alarmed by this. There were papers that were released by WikiSpeaks, or was it WikiSpeaks? I'm trying to remember now. But
WikiLeaks,
and
WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks, excuse me,
Mm,
WikiLeaks, and it was also released by the U.S. State Department, where Hillary Clinton was basically saying that they were doing this bombing of Libya on behalf of the French, and that the African dinar was the issue, right?
mm,
But what did Russia and China do as this happened? What were their positions in the United Nations? They abstained
right.
from preventing this war, even though it was very clear that the U.S. wanted to eliminate Gaddafi. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the long way of going to say is Russia friend or foe? I would say neither.
Mm-hmm.
I
Russia
agree.
is
I agree.
yeah, Russia is a potential customer and a potential rival, and that's the way we should look at it.
Powers, powers. Now.
Absolutely.
Sorry, go on, Freddy. You want to follow up to that?
Hey man, listen, I was just feeling you know, Dr. Clark, man. We have no
No friends.
friends.
Exactly, exactly,
Certainly,
exactly.
certainly. And this is an interesting point, though, right? Because obviously, so we've said it, right? It's European tribal warfare, yeah. And I did ask
Hmm.
the question earlier this week if anybody's ever heard the term tribal war in the last few weeks, and nobody has, right? So we
Yep.
know there's a disparity in language in the media when depending on who's in the conflict, right? And so we understand that neither of these powers, Russia or NATO, are our friends. Yeah? We understand that, yeah. At the same time, then there's the idea that this don't concern us whatsoever. All right, you know what I'm saying? We ain't got no dog in the fight. Therefore, this conflict is not of concern
Yeah,
to
man.
Africa, right? So
Yeah,
so
man.
is that a sensible position to take? Yeah, that a conflict of this nature is irrelevant as far as African people are concerned in general, and more specifically as far as Pan-Africanism, Black nationalism, and so on and so forth. Is that a intelligent position to take?
I think that's the wrong approach, because I'm going to take it from the most basic need of humanity: food.
Right.
Eastern Ukraine is the heartland of Europe,
Right.
and Russia and Ukraine are responsible for, I think, for 50% of the world's wheat. I believe a lot of
Oh
that
wow.
goes to Africa. It's a
Right.
huge amount of wheat, and I would have to go back. I mean, I have the sources lined up. I don't want to take away from the conversation there,
Go ahead, bro.
right?
Go ahead.
But um, and you also have to put this in context of what is happening with the climate cycles right now. And
Mm-hmm,
I don't want to veer this conversation off too much, but the world is getting cooler. You know, the sun has gone into a dormant stage called the grand solar minimum, and this is changing the climate cycle. So as you see, Europe's uh, Europe's grain stocks went down dramatically. That's one of the things responsible for inflation. South America had a horrible winter. Australia had a horrible winter, and China's had major floods that have wiped out its
Right.
farming for the past 2 years, right?
Mm,
So that being said, the Sahara is getting greener. The
mm,
Sahel is getting greener. So,
right.
and remember, that part of Africa was called the Fertile Crescent at one time.
Oh, right, yeah.
So again, Africa and African countries are sitting in the catbird seat in regards to supplying Europe in the world with food. So I think
Right.
we can benefit from this as long as we control the agricultural resources on our continent and in our countries, including the Caribbean.
Which we don't at the moment, and that's an interesting point. But it occurs to me, brother Kwame, that as far as military expansionism is concerned, that like Papa Garvey said, hear all, but attend only to that which concerns you. Yeah.
Yes.
And in the sense of the fact that, for example, we see a lot taking place, yeah, in relation
Mm,
to military interventions on the African continent right about now, and
yep.
also in the African diaspora in the Caribbean. Yeah, we're coming up on the
Yes.
anniversary of the Grenada Revolution. Yeah, 13th of
Hmm.
March. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
1970. All right, and we know that ended with an American invasion. We know that we have Africom, yeah,
Yep.
installing itself across the African continent at the moment. And when we see African, we see NATO, right? In the same
Yes,
breath,
exactly. Because
right?
Afrikan is headquartered in Germany, believe it or not.
In Germany, right? We
Yep.
know that that France dominates a number of different African nations and has had military presence in those African nations, which it is withdrawing now. But in my conversation with you the other day, you informed me that Russia is also developing its military presence on the African continent, but it seems to be developing itself in the places that France is worrying about. Is that
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because Russia, basically, Mali just kicked out France's military.
Yes.
The coup leaders in Mali kicked out France's military and replaced them with the Wagner Group, which is a Russian private military company, which is linked to the Kremlin. So basically, the Wagner Group is now assisting the Mali forces with security. And the Wagner Group has also intervened in the Central African Republic. Again, another former French client state. And you have to remember as well that the CFA has become an issue within the European Union and NATO. There was a German ambassador, and I forget his name, who wrote an article saying that France needs to basically get rid of the CFA as soon as possible. And that was several years back. And I'll provide you the link after the show so you can put the links on so people can access those links, because I think it was causing the EU too many political problems in Africa, right? And I go back to the food thing again, is that Mali's in the Sahel. And again, the Sahel has renewed itself now with all this greenery because of the changing weather patterns. And Russia, could have a reduction in crops due to the colder winters. So it's in Russia's best interest to have Mali as a state that's its friend. It's dealing with its interests now, right? And I won't even say friends. We have to stop talking about friends because the British said there are no permanent allies, just permanent interests.
Yep.
And so it's in Russia's interest at this point now to be able to supply food to its own people just in case the weather gets worse. And if you look up any article on the Grand Solar Minimum, the lion's share of the scientists writing these articles are Russian and Chinese. Any scientific paper.
Interesting.
So there's an agricultural component. And let's go to Ethiopia as well. Now, Russia didn't seem to be too overtly supporting Ethiopia in its civil war against the TPLF, but China did. Right? And so China essentially brokered a deal with Eritrea, which eliminated another front in the war. And then Turkey, Oman, and Iran supplied the Ethiopian government with drones in order to defeat the TPLF. So again, and that the dam was built with the financing of the Ethiopian people, but they're getting some assistance from Italy in a way and from China in a way. And again, and I go back to the Grand Solar Minimum. Every Chinese dynasty has fallen during the Grand Solar Minimum. These occur every 100 or so years. Right. So they're looking out for their own best interests as well, because, again, if Ethiopia is going to get wetter, if Sudan is going to get wetter, which it has, then you have agricultural products that are able to flow to their people. The major resource to me, the major wars going forward, even though oil is important, isn't about oil. It's about food.
And water.
And water, yes. Because look what happened with Libya. They destroyed the Nubian Aquifer project. I mean, NATO destroyed that.
Yes, sir. Do you know what? So to put some things into perspective on this, just to add to what you just shared, Brother Kwame. In 2018, the brother Kemi Seba, who lives in Benin, came to the UK and delivered his first English-speaking speech, by the way. I had the pleasure of hosting that event. You can watch it now on gotkushTV.
I saw it. He did well. I was very impressed with him.
It was a powerful speech, right? And so He went back, but when he went back to West Africa, he went to Burkina Faso, in which he and one of his brothers in arms was arrested. Yeah, and this was the period during which West Africa was discussing the echo. Yeah, as a shared currency, and there was a bit of friction because of, well, Nigeria wasn't sure if they were going to get involved in it. And then there was talk of, well, what's this going to mean for the CFA franc? And for those who are not aware, the CFA franc is the French currency. Yeah, it's a currency that is run by France. It's controlled by France. The money is printed in France, but 14 African nations are currently running under the CFA franc. Yeah, and it's a currency which means, for example, that these 14 African nations still have to deposit a large amount of their foreign reserves in the French central bank. And if they want to access that money, they have to apply for a loan, from France, to get that money. That monetary relationship also means that France has a certain amount of control and access to the natural resources of these African nations, and this has been the situation since so-called independence, right? In the 50s and the 60s, and so because of people like Brother Kemi Seba and the organization Urgence Panafricaniste, which he's the head of, and other organizers on the ground, in recent years there's been an upswell, a groundswell of opposition to the CFA franc from the grassroots in places like Congo and Senegal and Benin and Togo, and Guinea, right? And all of these
Cameroon has been at the forefront of it,
right? Of it, of all these francophone African nations. Now, what happened was all of these French-speaking African nations signed up to the ECHO. So what happened is Macron, at the time, delivered a speech instructing the African leaders, to lessen, deal with the anti-French sentiment, that was spreading among the so-called francophone, in terminology, African nations. And if they didn't do so, he would withdraw the French military, right? And so there'll be no protection against the Al Qaeda and the Al Shabaab and the Islamic terrorists that were created by the CIA in the first place, right?
Although, one of the reasons
absolutely,
go ahead.
Yeah, exactly, and one of the reasons Mali kicked out the French. One of the reasons Mali kicked out the French on behalf of the people is because the French weren't preventing any attacks by them, even with their military presence there. And when France increased their military presence there, my first thought was, obviously, France was supporting these, Al Qaeda type terrorists, which has been some evidence of the case, in order to justify their presence there. And so this is that threat of leaving these African countries is kind of public consumption, because I'm sure these African leaders, even though they're sellouts, know deep down the French aren't protecting them from anything.
They absolutely know that, right? Now, what happened next was interesting. Kemi Seba was arrested, like I said, in Burkina Faso. He's one of the main voices that have been championing the anti-CFA franc vibration.
Yes, sir. Yes,
sir. At the time he's in prison, Emmanuel Macron flies to West Africa. I believe it's Cote d'Ivoire he visits, which is like the central hub for all forms of selloutery when it comes to so-called French-speaking Africa. Yeah, they always go to
yes,
right. And I think it was Ivory Coast, and I think it was Mali that he traveled to, and he got them to sign an agreement which said that they, with the ECHO, they would continue to attach their ECHO to the French euro. Yeah, so it would still be regulated by the French euro, and that same relationship would continue. Well, that effectively deaded the entire ECHO situation, because none of the other non-French aligned African nations were going to agree to that. Or let's say the so-called Anglophone African nations, they were never going to agree to that. So that basically deaded the whole program and maintained France's political what's the word?
Hegemony.
Right, within the region. So we see all these political games taking place, So go
And then the
ahead.
funny thing, as a result of that, Ghana's become more francophone. Sorry to interrupt you, brother Shakara, but
Go ahead.
I mean, I swear that Akufo-Addo meets with Macron every couple of days. You always see a press
Definitely.
conference with him and Macron, right?
Yes.
So why is that then? Has Ghana
Well,
kind of
one of the reasons is because there's two things, right? Because at one point he delivered a relatively good speech, yeah, next to Macron a few years ago that had everybody impressed, yeah. Nana Akufo-Addo did, right? But soon after that, we heard that French was going to become a secondary national language taught in schools, yeah, in Ghana, and there was
exactly?
some uproar about that. And on the one hand, there was a seemingly strategic reason for it, right? It was so that because most of the region is French speaking, it will give us more, leeway to be able to communicate with our French speaking brothers and sisters, right? But then another thing that happened is that the main port in Tema in Ghana was bought out by a French billionaire. Yeah, at the time.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah.
And I'm forgetting the guy's name. I've forgotten the guy's name, but it's a French billionaire currently owns the main Ghanaian trading port. Yeah, seaport in Tema in Ghana at the moment. Yeah, so you know what I mean. So there's a lot of big French business going on about the place. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna come to the chat. So give me a sec here.
No problem.
I'm gonna come to you, Chief. For there, I see you. What's it? So after Chief Fuller speaks, I'll get you to answer this question, brother Kwame. Super Black says, totally disagree with Pianki on this one. Africa would not starve without Ukrainian wheat. We don't need it. We simply need to control our own food production. And I don't think that's what you were saying. So we're going to come back to that.
I did not. I did not say that Africa would starve. I said that a lot of African countries, Egypt, Mauritania, I'm trying to think which other one, are dependent on Ukrainian wheat. And what I was trying to say now, it's an opportunity if Africa steps up its agricultural production and controls that agricultural production, because now you have a big time negotiating chip with a Europe and with China, whose agricultural crops have lessened in the past couple years.
Most definitely. I think the point there is basically that the reliance, the current reliance upon Ukrainian wheat is not to do with the lack of productive soil on the African continent. It's to do with economic relationships and policies that are installed by the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank, etc., and the World Economic Forum. Right. So
because they prevented the and I'm glad you mentioned the World Economic Forum, because all of the major heads of the international institutions like the World Bank and IMF are members of the World Economic Forum. And the major banks, the Rothschild family, the Rockefeller family, they all have board members in that organization. So again, as you know, with the IMF structural adjustments back in the 70s and 80s, they kept African countries and Caribbean countries from subsidizing their agriculture, as the United States is allowed to subsidize their agriculture and the EU is allowed to subsidize their agriculture. So basically you have these cheap European goods floating into black countries, and it's completely destroyed the agricultural systems, forcing people to move to the cities, contributing to a lot of economic hardship and social hardship particularly.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, man. Wow, this conversation is very enlightening, man. I really appreciate it. I'm sitting here vibing right now, man.
Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, man, I just wanted to really appreciate the conversation, man. Brother Kwame bringing the heat right now. He pulled up and he did not disappoint. Let me say this.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Let me say this. I've been watching this thing as well unfold from Freetown. Now, Freetown, of course, I'm on the African continent, and I'm watching how a lot of things are happening. Like, I remember just like a few months ago, the United States pulled out of Afghanistan, almost like confusingly. And was Afghanistan? Yeah, I believe it was Afghanistan they pulled out of.
It was Afghanistan. That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, and then you have these emergence of liberation struggles, what I would call, people who are maybe a little misguided and they may not be able to express themselves in the way that we understand the struggle to be. But it's people who understand that they have an opportunity to make a move. And I want to talk briefly about that. Um, and just in the context of me coming from the United States of America and the history there. Um, every single time that these European powers fight, we've taken a side and fought on all sides. From the American Revolution
Yep.
to the War 1812
Mm-hmm.
to the Civil War to World
Mm-hmm.
War One and World War Two, the Korean War, you name it. There's always been black men, women, and families greatly impacted by every single imperialist war that has taken place in the over 500-year-long scramble for Africa. We think that the scramble for Africa began at the Berlin Conference. No, they just hyped it up a little bit. You know, the first
Exactly.
time, the first time a stinking pink person stepped his toes on African soil initiated a process of long suffering, and that led to this scramble. It continues. You know, when you're talking about France being kicked out and Russia pulling up, it continues. This is going to go in a different direction within Europe. White people are going to
Exactly.
benefit. And so this is why Marcus Garvey did not unite with communism. He said, because at the end, we will still be under a white leadership. And so
And
he was trying to break that white hegemony over black sovereignty. And so when we
and
understand it like that, I want to go ahead, brother.
yeah, and I remember Marcus Garvey said that, he found it funny that blacks wanted to unite with poor whites when the white man giving us the most day-to-day hell during that time period was the poor white man.
Yes, sir.
you know,
Absolutely.
and and
Absolutely.
and a lot of Garvey's former friends who wound up turning against him wound up going to Russia, and they wound up going to Russia and seeing the error of their ways due to the racism in Russia. I mean, there's a countless list on them. I'm trying to go off the top of my head who
Oh
they
yeah.
were, but
Chief among them, was George Padmore. Though he wouldn't have
there you
Oh
considered
go.
yeah.
himself. See, he wouldn't have considered himself a friend of Garvey.
Yeah,
but
I think
Oh yeah.
W.A. Domingo was W.A. Domingo one of them. Did he go to Russia? I'm not sure if he
I'm not
did
sure
or
if he
not.
went to Russia, but he definitely went down the Communist Party route. You know what
Yep,
I'm saying, so, but
and,
I don't
and
know
he
if he went to
regretted it.
Russia.
Real quick.
Yeah, yeah.
Real
Go ahead,
quick.
go ahead.
Uh,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to complete my thought real fast.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I seen this chart, and the chart reads how African countries voted on UN resolution against the Ukraine invasion,
Hmm.
and 28 countries voted in favor.
Mm-hmm.
One country voted outright against, and that was only Eritrea.
Eritrea, yeah.
Hmm.
17 abstained, and 8 there's no vote recorded. Of the 8 with no vote recorded are also Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Burkina Faso, all African states that have currently had recent coups or coup attempts, as
Yes.
well as Mali. So I'm seeing a pattern here, whereas geopolitically, there is a consciousness on the continent among at least some of the states where there has to be enough mass pressure from the people to keep these politicians in pressure, where there has to be a mass movement, there has to be mass approval and support for these kind of movements to be happening. And I'm saying that Marcus Garvey built the UNIA in the midst of World War One. They were fighting
Yep.
themselves, and he was building. You understand?
Hmm.
He was thinking about
Hmm.
Africa and turning Africa into a superpower so that they could never molest us like they molest themselves. And so what I want to say is that um, what should ordinary African people be doing, first of all around the world, not just here? Because what we find is that we're looking at the social media, and social media can be sensationalizing. So we don't get a
Hmm.
clear picture on what's happening. We see our people being mistreated in Ukraine, but we also see Nigeria sending soldiers. And so there's a confusion here that's going on. I live in Sierra Leone, and Sierra Leone has just approved the resolution. So does that mean that they're ready to follow Nigeria up and send some of my brothers and sisters from here to go fight
Right.
in this white man's war in Europe. So this is a very serious thing, and I want to ask you seriously: what should ordinary people do at home and abroad to prepare not only for this immediate crisis, but at least from now on? We're talking about food, brother. One of the things we do in
Yep.
Sierra Leone is we grow food. And I think that instead of supporting these people, we should be organizing rallies to grow more food this year. You understand?
You
For
have
ourselves.
you have hit the heart, my heart, because I love growing food, right?
That's
So
why
one
that's
thing,
sorry, brother Kwame. That's why Chief for is Chief for it.
yeah,
I'm just
exactly,
saying that.
exactly, because one is growing food, two, and that's growing food in your own backyard initially. Two
Yes,
is
sir.
when you grow food in your own backyard, you start bartering with your neighbors, and now you're creating a outside economy outside of the Western international system. And
Yes,
then
sir. Yes,
I would suggest our people collectively get together and start buying small acreages of property to grow food. Because again, food was skyrocketing before this invasion, right? And now it's really skyrocketing after this. So the control of food, you have to control that food in your own community. That's what we should be focused on. The other thing that we should be focused on with these Western economies dying and their currencies falling apart, if you are in a place on the African continent where they still do traditional indigenous forms of mining, like gold mining, get your gold. Right now, granted, you might not be able to spend it immediately, but the fact is that that is going to be very valuable going forward, especially if you might need capital equipment from Europe, especially, and I think it gives you more of a bargaining chip if, say, if your community becomes independent dealers and want to trade some of their goods with some outsiders, basically. So to me, it's food and some precious metals, and the big thing, you need to have cash at home. Because at the outset of this crisis, they were talking about Russian hacking of computer systems in the United States and throughout the world. But here's what's interesting. The World Economic Forum held a cyber pandemic exercise called Cyber Polygon, talking about a hack attack. And guess who was their major client in that exercise? Russia. Russia held the exercise in conjunction with IBM. So we don't know what chicanery these transnational oligarchs have for the people of the world. So it's food, having some cash, or something that you can transact with in order for your family to stay viable and be fed and
And
have a
some
roof over their head.
weapons. And some weapons.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Another
Yes.
subject for another time.
Exactly.
What's it
You
good?
Exactly.
know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yep. I know
but
what you mean.
you know,
You don't
it's
need to say
interesting
anymore.
indeed, it's interesting that you use the term transnational oligarchs, because to hear the news now, you would think that oligarchy only exists in Russia. Uh, you know that the only place that wealthy people control the government is in Russia. I was teaching students, yeah, of between 11 and 15 today, and I asked them, do you know any countries in which poor people control the government? And they all said no. Yeah, I said, how wealthy is Joe Biden? How wealthy do you reckon Joe Biden is?
Exactly.
And Boris Johnson, and
Well,
you know what I'm saying? Like, it's
yeah,
one of
and
them things.
let's look at economics during COVID, right?
Right.
The billionaires increased their income by 50%, if not more, their wealth by 50 to 100% during COVID. So
Yes, sir.
for all of Klaus Schwab's great reset, talking about reducing income inequality, all his buddies made themselves even more unequal. I mean, Jeff Bezos, the Rockefellers,
Yes, sir.
Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. I mean, can I go down all the names who actually run the U.S. government? George
Yes, sir.
Soros, right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
And so, yeah, the U.S. is an oligarchy, and it's been an oligarchy for at least 150 years,
all right. At least. But
at least.
Baba Senghor is in the building. I wanna give honor to my president, brother Kwame is
Shout
I
out,
met him
Baba.
once years
you
ago.
know
I
what I'm
met him
saying.
once years
But
ago. He might not
yeah, man.
remember me though. So, yeah.
I'm sure he does, bro. Brother Baba Senghor has a brilliant memory.
He has a great memory.
What's it called? So it's a great reason. How Africans are taking in and learning to keep speaking truth to power. Give thanks for that encouragement, Baba Senghor. You know, yeah, man.
And
Some serious things.
I appreciate that from a learned elder like him too. So
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I want to
a wise
similar to
elder,
what
a wise elder.
one of the wisest that I've come to know is Baba Senghor. And what's
Mhm.
beautiful about Baba Senghor is that he is an elder, but he's got such a youthful spirit. You know what I'm saying? He's got the youthful energy.
Yes, he
And
does.
we need that kind of eldership in this day and age. So I love to Baba Senghor to buy it.
Let's
You know
put
what
it
I'm
this
saying?
way. I'm sure he can handle himself if somebody stepped his way.
Most
Let's put it
definitely.
that way. So.
I wouldn't want it in Baba Senghor. I wouldn't want it in Baba Senghor.
No, I wouldn't. For me seeing him, no, I wouldn't either. You know, not if I want to,
but
not if I want to keep these teeth here. You right?
indeed. Eh? But
Yeah,
brother Kwame,
man.
I wanna follow on from what Chief Fuddy was asking, and exploring and turn that to the Caribbean region, in fact, to the Americas in general,
Mhm.
where we have significant African populations. And to make this point that when we say Black nationalism, Pan Africanism, we are not confining it exclusively to the African continent. That is the
No.
center of activity. It's ground zero. It's the front line. But Pan Africanism and Black nationalism exist wherever African people are. And so we have a number of nations in the Americas in which we are the majority. Yeah. And CARICOM, yeah, recently released a statement on this crisis, basically calling for, a cease of arms and ceasefire. But they also represented on the issue of the students, yeah, the Africans, quote unquote African Caribbean students who are
Mhm.
being denied exit from Ukraine at this moment in time. Yeah. But how does this relate to African people in the African diaspora, specifically in regions like the Caribbean? How is these politics affecting us in those regions?
Well, I mean, I'm sounding like a one note or one chord musician here,
Go ahead, go
but
ahead, go ahead.
again, you have
Yes,
a lot of fertile land in the Caribbean,
yes,
and North America's crop production went down last year.
yeah,
So with
right,
all that
right.
fertile land, I would say if you're in Kingston, if you're in Port-au-Prince, if you're in Porto, Spain, you should be getting together with somebody and buying some land in the country and
Mm-hmm,
farming.
mm-hmm.
Because
Yes, sir.
again, one, the Caribbean is heavily dependent on imported food, particularly from the states. And I know my experiences in Jamaica is from the states, from Israel, from
Yes, sir.
Japan, from
Yes, sir.
Canada,
Yes, sir.
from
Yes, sir.
from the EU. Right.
Yes, sir.
This is
Yes,
time
sir.
to get off of that teat. Right.
Yes,
Get
sir.
off of that. Get off of that sagging cow's teat and get on something that's your own. Right. So
Yes,
to
sir.
me, people need to be um, pooling the resources together to buy land, because if the U.S. currency is decline, if all currencies are declining, granted the Russian ruble declined the most lately, but if you take the U.S. currency against gold, that has declined. But if the
Mm.
U.S. currency is getting weaker, and these central banks are no longer going to raise interest rates, because that was the original plan before this invasion, and the
Yes,
central
sir.
banks were going to reluctantly raise interest rates, and Putin, to me, bailed them out by
Mm-hmm.
having this invasion. What is going to
Mm-hmm.
happen, relatively speaking? The Caribbean currencies are going to collapse too. That's going to
Mm-hmm.
make imports more expensive. But
Mm-hmm.
again, Caribbean countries are holding on to a chip, that fertile land and food resources, which your clients slash rivals slash competitors are going to need.
Is that possible though, bro? In the current political climate, here's why I asked that question. Yeah,
Yep.
it's possible
Hmm.
on the grassroots level. That's what we need to be doing. But at the same
Yes.
time, we have a situation in which, yeah, the Prime Minister of Jamaica recently is joining the Queen's Privy Council, the Queen of England Privy Council,
Hmm.
right? You know what I'm saying? And it
Yes.
seems like the general trajectory, with some exceptions in some regards, yeah. But the general trajectory, if we're going to talk about Africa and the Caribbean right about now, is neoliberalism. Yeah,
Oh,
the
yes.
neoliberal agenda is very strong, and that is designed to maintain the status quo, in the sense of keeping our markets open to foreign products, be they food, be they technology. Yeah, especially
Hmm.
technology, because we're being sold on a dream of making it into the digital world before. Sorry, what's the word? Jumping over the industrial age into the digital age. Yeah. So we're
when you
now
don't
being no
even make
rule
it
that we're
when you
now
don't even when you don't even make a paperclip. And I remember John Henry
paperclip.
Clark says you have no right to
Exactly.
call yourself a country if you
And
can't
it's
make a paperclip,
crazy.
It's
And,
craziness.
and
right?
you know what's crazy about it? What's crazy about it is that out of all the continents on Earth, out of all the land masses that belong to people on Earth,
Hmm.
we could self-industrialize and dominate the technical
Exactly.
cyber age because we have a growing population. Regardless of everything
Mm-hmm.
that's happening, babies is being born,
Yes, sir.
and
Mm-hmm.
our population will be the youngest
Hmm.
in the next 20 years on
Hmm.
Earth.
Yep.
So you got to
It,
remember
Yeah.
that these people are fighting each other at the same time while they're not reproducing.
Yeah, and if I remember the stats correctly, Chief Fode, I think Africa has 50% of the world's youth under the age of 15.
Right
50
now,
right
right
now.
now,
The
and then
the
believe it or
future.
not, you know
Mhm.
the rate of teenage childbirth here is off the chain. I grew up in America where it was off the chain, but it's like cultural here. No one bats an eye
Wow.
when it, no one bats an eye when a 16-year-old is pregnant. No one expects her to go to school. No one expects her
Mhm.
to go own a business. They expect her to get married to the person she got pregnant to and deal with it. And
Mhm.
what our people need is family development skills and support
hmm hmm
so that they
Yes.
can begin to have consciousness about how to be responsible individually and then how to turn that together collectively into a
Most
mighty
definitely.
network of power.
Most definitely.
Yeah,
But
but
you see,
and also to answer Brother Shaka Ra's question,
go ahead.
um,
Go ahead.
um, and we have to agree that neoliberalism took sway over the Caribbean with the Grenada invasion. That was the end of any progressive political view in the Caribbean.
And
From
just to
you,
point out, not to interrupt you, Brother Kwame, but just to point out that there were a number of so-called Caribbean leaders that supported America in that invasion. Jamaica was among
yep.
what was one of them. Dominica Eugenia Charles was the other. And I'm
Hmm.
forgetting there was a third who I'm forgetting at the moment. But continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, and in fact, Jamaicans were involved in the assassination of Maurice Bishop.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
so yeah, that's very much that's very
Hmm.
much the case. So that being said, all the leaders, including the current one in Barbados, who everybody is celebrating, um, belong to the neoliberal camp, and they're captives of the IMF, they're captives of the
Hmm.
World Bank, they're captives
Hmm.
of the big banking cartels and the big
Hmm.
mining cartels and the
Hmm.
big hotel cartels. So to
Hmm.
me, for lack of a better term, forget them. People are going to have to, and that's why I emphasize going out to the country. The way to get outside of the control of these
Hmm.
neoliberals is to grow your own food, to have the land to make your own clothes, and have the skills to repair your own transportation.
Certainly.
And
Certainly.
so, and that way they can't control you with their little social programs and cut you off of food aid and all that sort of stuff to make sure you vote for them, or you could take this gun and kill their rival opponent and things of that nature, right?
Yes,
So to
sir.
me,
Yes, sir.
that there needs to be a collective push towards the land, especially with food prices going up. Because now,
Definitely.
when you have that food inflation, there's two things that can happen. Food inflation produces revolutions. Food inflation produces extreme repression, right? And in order to avoid the repressive aspects of that, there needs to be a collective push towards the land. And if also it denies the oligarchs within those countries the means to oppress you. You're not funding your own oppression
Most definitely.
if you're withdrawing support from those big companies there.
Definitely, definitely. We've got a few comments in the chat. I'm going to take them collectively because they're all from the same person and related. Yeah, Brother Coffee Campbell is
Mm.
in the building. And well, first he says that the Great Reset is anti-capitalist. It's probably another subject for another time, but we could touch on
Yeah,
that.
I don't agree with that one.
What's
But
it called? No, sorry, Brother Kwame. Brother Coffee is our resident hyper-capitalist neoliberal. So that's where we're going with that.
oh,
But
okay.
name one. He says name one country that developed through autarky. For those who don't know what
What is
autarky is
autarky? If you don't, Yeah,
Autarky is not trading with anybody, basically, which I'm not
I
sure
didn't
that's what
say
you
that.
promoted. Yeah, yeah,
No,
that's,
I didn't say that at all.
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think so. I mean, he's right. You know, he's right. But at the same time, we got to realize that as Pan Africanists, our goal is to convert our continent into a country, is to
Yeah,
unify
yeah,
African
yeah.
sovereign states into a country, into a federalized republic that we can really gear up and beat up on anybody that want to beat up on us. But the reality is that if we can trade within ourselves and among ourselves, if we can travel across borders easily, then you'll see something happen in Africa that no other continent on the face of the earth can do for itself. That's what I truly believe.
Most
and you're
definitely.
right, Chiefo. You're right, Chiefo. Africa has more than 1 billion Black Africans as we speak right now. That's a
Mhm,
heck of a large market to trade with,
mhm,
right? And so that internal trade alone would make Africa rich. But as I kept on repeating myself, we can't be viewing this fight as fight between the good guys and the bad guys. They're potential clients, potential
mhm,
rivals, and potential
mhm.
customers. I think this is the third
Yes,
time
sir.
I've said this in this interview. So I don't know if Kofi's actually listening, but
Mhm,
again, we have leverage now that they have this because these two sides of the Eurasians are having this conflict. And I'll give you an example. Venezuela, which is a largely black country, abstained in voting um, on the resolution in the UN. And guess who's
mhm.
knocking at their door these days because they banned Russian oil from coming to the United States. The United States came to Venezuela trying to cut a deal.
Sorry, brother Kwame. Brother Coffee says he's not a liberal and he's not a neoliberal, but he could sue me for libel. So I'm a retract that statement.
I never
Until
said you're neoliberal too,
no
brother
no
Coffee, but
I said it. So I'm gonna retract that statement
Yeah, get him, Kobe.
further
Get him, get him, get him.
until further evidence presents itself. We're gonna, which I'm sure it will.
but
Having said that, though,
but
he has asked, yeah, if the panel could
hmm,
define neoliberalism. So we should do that. And then there's a comment here on self sufficiency, which will come to.
um to me, neoliberalism, and let's all contribute to this because I may not have the
No, go ahead.
the comprehensive definition.
Hmm.
That is the concentration of money in the hands of the few,
Hmm.
in using the government to cut budgets from their state enterprises and refocus them on privately owned enterprises.
Yes, sir.
And
That's it.
neoliberalism provides some veneer of social movement to make it
Hmm.
appear that this is a friendly regime initially. But anybody who sees anything knows that neoliberalism is damaging. I mean, the biggest, the easiest thing to access in terms of neoliberalism, in terms of documentary, is Life and Debt.
Most definitely.
And then
It plays a
in
whole series.
Haiti,
Yep.
Haiti is almost a testing grounds for neoliberalism.
What
I
what
mean,
so go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, look at it. The earthquake, the charity complex in Haiti, in the wake of the earthquake 12 years ago, those billions of dollars that the Red Cross was supposed to get wound up going to the big mining companies,
Mhm.
the big telecommunications companies, while the people didn't have any shelter. And these big international conglomerates ally with the local oligarchs to try to repress the people in these areas. That's neoliberalism.
Yeah. So neoliberalism is basically an ultra capitalist kind of economic framework. Yeah, that is built around, as you were saying, brother Kwame, reducing trade tariffs. Yeah, and that kind of thing. Free market, ultra free market capitalism, right? And the problem with it from an African point of view, in terms of our position as it stands in the world right now, is that it concentrates power within developed nations who have big corporations to export goods, right? If that makes sense. Yeah. So that basically our nations just become dumping grounds for foreign goods, be they food, technology, and so on and so forth, because of the idea of reducing trade tariffs free market. Yeah, so that means that them can come in. But in order to have a free market that benefits people, the people must be involved, yeah, in the market, which this neoliberal policies, this neoliberal politics doesn't cater for that, because the wealth and the power is concentrated in Europe, right? And so it works in tandem with a lot of the policies of the IMF and the World Bank. Whenever they come into your nation and give you something, they tell you to reduce trade barriers, yeah,
Yep.
and open your markets to foreign goods, right? And all of these things, yeah. And so
Absolutely.
that is the policy that has been dominating African and Caribbean nations for a good few generations. The patron saints of neoliberal politics are Maggie Thatcher, yeah, former British Prime Minister, and Ronald Reagan,
Yep.
yeah, who presided over the what we saw in relation to Grenada, yeah, at the time, who presided over the destruction of economies of places like Jamaica, and who also presided over the era of structural adjustment, yeah,
Let's not
um,
let's not
on the
forget about let, let's not forget about Iran Contra and the crack bomb.
yes sir, yes
That's
sir,
right.
yes sir, sir. So
And
yeah,
Chief
so
O'Day, you
basically
have a good point. Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
sorry, go on. No, I was going to say it's basically
Because
about privatization of your economy, but the wheels of power are still concentrated in the West. Yeah, so that the privatization in your country is through the influx of Western companies, European and American companies that own and control the resources and the means of production within your nation to their own benefit and without you in any
yeah,
case, shape,
Oh
or
and
form.
yeah,
let's look at the results of neoliberalism. And Chief O'Day bringing up the crack complex with Iran Contra is a great point, because neoliberalism also affects black communities within the United States, right? So what are the end results? You have broken families, increased crime, increased sexual abuse, increased drug abuse. This is what neoliberalism has done to the community, the black community inside the United States and black communities outside the United States, right? So it
oh yeah,
hasn't done any good for us. And
oh yeah.
to bring up the crack thing again, there was a ex-Bush official, Catherine Austin Fitts, who, after she left the Bush the elder's first administration, she did a analysis of she had a real estate computer program, and she did analysis of the real estate sales in South Central Los Angeles. So what she found that was interesting was that the cracks, the Crips and the Bloods would move into a neighborhood that was formerly working class, middle class black neighborhood. The crime would pick up, the crack would proliferate in the neighborhood, the people would move out of the neighborhood, the Crips and Bloods would move out, and guess who moves in? White real estate developers buying that land cheaply, and the real estate cheaply, and the real estate goes through the roof.
Exactly,
And that's repeated
exactly.
time and time again in black communities throughout the United States.
You
That's
know,
neoliberalism.
absolutely. You know what? I want to say that was perfect segue into how neoliberalism plays out in the black community, particularly in the United States, as it relates to mass incarceration, as it
Yes, sir.
relates to you just mentioned it, gentrification,
Yes, sir.
as it relates as it
Hmm.
relates to predatory policing.
Hmm.
All of these things are related to neoliberal policies and parties and blind people who just think that they have to choose between the two. And it's destroying us politically. We're completely
It
evaporated
is.
by now.
Most def. And it's
Yeah,
this
because I mean,
market. Go ahead, bro. Go ahead. Go ahead.
it goes Shakara. Yeah, because
No,
I'll go back to the election. Go ahead. Yeah, I'll go back to the
go, bro.
election last year in 2020 in the states. Is and I don't like either party, but black people basically pissed away their leverage by
Mm,
diving totally into the Democratic camp, right?
Right.
And if you look at any
With the threat of with the threat of trying to get Trump out, as though that was a material
exactly
difference.
as if there's a real difference between Trump and Biden, right?
Hmm.
And so, but if you look at other ethnic groups, the so-called Hispanics have
Yes, sir.
more leverage and they get more resources because they're not in any one party's camp. So again,
Yes, sir.
we lack strategic thinking, and too many of our people are on an emotional level when it comes to making decisions. You have to be able to
Definitely.
step back and make a somewhat dispassionate decision when it comes to politics. Politics
Hmm.
is a transactional. Um, Politics is transactional. You do for me, then you get my vote. You don't do for
Hmm.
me, or I'm sitting on the sidelines. It's totally transactional. You can't get
Hmm.
into the personalities of the candidates that are running.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My brother, I'm kind of minded that we've gone here, so we might as well deal with this particular comment here, which is that the Great Reset is anti-capitalist. You said you disagreed. True, we've gone into the neoliberalism. We might as well just address this as well.
Well, I want to ask you a question. Who runs what organization initiated the Great Reset? The WEF, the World
Mm,
Economic Forum.
mm,
Um, Look at the board of the World Economic Forum, and it's the top oligarchs, the top capitalist CEOs, the top
mhm,
their top politicians, which they own,
mhm,
that sit on the board of the World Economic Forum. And Klaus Schwab's father was the managing director of Escher Weiss, who builds these big projects, including nuclear power plants. Right?
mhm,
Escher Weiss was a main pillar in propping up the Nazi economy. And then under Klaus Schwab's direction of Escher Weiss, they helped South Africa avert sanctions. And I find it interesting that Caribbean politicians and African politicians are falling all over themselves to go speak at Davos when you're dealing with somebody who helped prop up the apartheid regime. And when
mhm,
it comes to uber capitalists, capitalists have
mhm.
no problem supporting communists and they have no problem supporting socialists, because
Most definitely.
if you support a communist or socialist government, you get the lion's share of the contracts.
Mm.
Government
So
is about awarding contracts, period.
yeah, my brother. You know, this is and just to contextualize this, yeah, because this is important because this is the political environment in which this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, or NATO and Ukraine, sorry, and Russia is taking place right about now. And remember, the title of our show today is Ukraine, NATO, Russia, and the African world. We're delving into it, the relevance of these dynamics for African people. I do want to move on because there are some other wars and military activity going on in the world that we haven't touched on yet. But obviously, that whenever Brother Kwame comes, he comes to promote capitalism, right? And if we allow him, he will take over the whole conversation with
Yep.
capitalist questions. And so I don't want to go too much into this, but just to address this particular point, this is incorrect. Like literally, neoliberalism is about privatization. That is the about
Yep.
sorry. If you study any what's it called, authoritative literature, yeah, on what neoliberalism is, privatization, free market fundamentalism, austerity, yeah, and all of these terminologies are going to come up in the definition. Yeah, so this is not an accurate statement. I just wanted to make that
No,
point.
it's
Go ahead.
not. And then I'm gonna. This is my last thing in regards to that. Look up the World Economic Forum's Great Reset in regards to food, and also
Hmm.
read up and look up the Rockefeller Foundation's Reset the Table in regards to food. And
Yes, sir.
basically, it's about centralization, control of food, and the corporate stakeholders, and the genetically modified, the companies that participate in genetically modified engineering taking over the food. Remember,
All right.
Yeah, man.
neoliberalism neoliberalism is a form of fascism. And if you use Mussolini's definition of fascism, fascism
Mhm.
is the marriage between corporation and state coming together.
Mm,
And
mhm.
that's
Oh yeah,
exactly what neoliberalism is,
And
and that is
I guess
exactly what the World Economic Forum is.
and I guess
exactly.
But this idea, because you know, like you have, I don't know if you come across these people, brother Kwame, brother Chief, for it, whereby they believe in this form of capitalism that has never really existed. You know, as though markets absent political institutions have ever run any state anywhere in the world has ever existed, if that makes sense, right? So this idea that you can have markets without political institutions, or somehow capitalism nullifies the need or the influence of political institutions, if that makes sense, right? So it's that kind of non-existent politics that, you know, people. So any association with government is therefore not capitalism, which is a ridiculous definition
And
to
that's
go
not
about.
true.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
that's never existed in history. But go ahead,
You
Chief.
know
What you
what? Yeah, man, we're talking about this global reset, man. We've been talking about this for over a year, ever since COVID, which we're not hearing anything about currently.
right now?
All
Yeah,
of a
and
Nope.
sudden.
I was gonna come to that, and also the wars and the military activity that has not been spoken about. So we've got a blackout on COVID. We've got a blackout on the bombing of Somalia. We've got a
Somalia.
blackout
Yep.
America bombed Somalia.
America bombed Somalia. We've got a
Hmm.
blackout on what is taking place in Mali and Togo, and Sudan, yeah, and Ethiopia. We've got a blackout of what's taking place in Syria, yeah, and
Hmm.
Yemen, and Iran, and Afghanistan, yeah,
Yep.
and the surrounding areas, right? Holy power are going on the place, yeah. War and
Hmm.
rumors of war all about the
Hmm.
place, yeah. And we're talking about Syria as though it has the highest death toll of these conflicts, which it does not,
No.
yeah. So let's go into that. Let's talk about that, including the fact that COVID seems to have disappeared, and flu and ordinary influenza and cold seems to have made a reappearance.
Yeah, and and that's why when this war, this Ukraine thing started, I said, isn't that interesting? As these countries are all rolling back their restrictions, suddenly this war starts, right? And be it for me to say, if I put my conspiratorial hat on, is
Mm,
this war an excuse for further mass repression of the masses, right? And let me get to my theory about the sickness. The Western economies collapsed in August of 2019. You have something called the repo market where companies go to get commercial paper and to make their interday loans, basically keep their cash flows going on a day-to-day basis. And that market collapsed in August 2019. Subsequent to that, the vice president of BlackRock Group, and BlackRock owns controlling interest in most of the major corporations in the West now. His name is Hildebrand. He said in August of 2019 that central banks have to give money to the people directly. Well, what happened at the beginning of COVID? People started getting these stimulus checks, right? And to me, the powers that be saw Western capitalism collapsing, and these billionaires and oligarchs, the what they fear most are the masses. So they had to keep the masses repressed and locked down, but yet give them enough trinkets so they wouldn't go after them at this point. Well, that story died out after 2 years because now you have all these convoys and whatnot, and the masses are starting to go after those in power. So voila, we have a new war. When all these other wars are going on, and the battle for Africa rages at this point, and the battle for Arabia rages. I'm interested in what you guys think about this.
Well, let me say something, brother, man. I had an experience in my life before, and I seen something crazy happen, man. Um, you know, it's a prison story, actually. It's a story of being in the county prison as a young man and seeing something crazy happen. And a fight broke out. And all of a sudden, the guards start yelling, lock in, lock in, lock in, lock in. And of course, everybody start running for themselves to lock in.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't figure out why I was supposed to lock in. But whenever the security forces are moving in to lock in or stop a fight, they want everyone else to lock into their cages,
Yes, sir.
until it's over. And also, randomly within a prison system, they will lock a whole prison down and shake it down for all of the weapons,
Mm.
all of whatever's going on that they don't know about. They will
Mm-hmm.
shake down the prison. Sometimes they'll lock it down for a whole month and go cell by cell, strip search everything.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
this is what I see the Great Reset doing. And so, in saying that, um, I want to say that this Great Reset that our enemies, our ops, have put into motion has
Yes, sir.
also put a great rehabilitation into motion
Yes,
of
sir.
the UNIA, ACL, and other Pan African forces around the world.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Um, they reset, we reset. They
Yes,
slap
sir.
us, we slap them.
Yes,
And
sir.
the fight continues. This is the era that we define this century.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that's exactly why we had to have this conversation in the way that we've had it today. Because we've dealt with whether we should be on either side of this conflict necessarily, but we could go even more into NATO and what it is and how it functions and Russia's role in the world and so on and so forth. And we need to have those conversations. At the same time, so much of our conversation is centered around analyzing them. Yeah, and we need to do that. It's a necessary part of the process. All right, but in terms of the fact that whilst we're focused on what they want us to focus on, which is Russia versus Ukraine, like we're saying, what is taking place in Haiti, yeah, right now, we're not speaking about. Serious
No.
things are going on, yeah, in Haiti right now, right?
Yes,
Just I'm
sir.
saying
Yes,
that that
sir.
when,
Yeah,
that,
a
that when
government
we
was
are
removed.
right, exactly. I mean, recently, a president was killed. Yeah. What's it called? Governments have been removed in Haiti for the last 2 decades, right? And so on. Yeah. And
You can say the
whilst we're all,
last 200 years. To be honest with
this
you,
is a good
Yeah,
point,
man.
right?
yep.
And
Hmm.
the same people that are here promoting free market economy and sovereignty are the same people that are destroying these economies and ensuring that the markets are not free at all in relation to the people them that live in these countries, right? And so
Yep.
the point I'm making is that we cannot get so caught up on the media propagation of Russia versus Ukraine that we forget to centralize we own our business, yeah, our own business in terms of what is taking place because war is a daily reality for African people
Yep.
in many parts of the world. What is taking place in Papua New Guinea, in West Papua,
Hmm.
yeah, and things such as that. What is taking place in Somalia, yeah, in relation to Saudi Arabia and USA, and so on and so forth. Serious things are going on in other world. What is taking place in Zimbabwe, yeah, with the attempt
Yes.
to mash up the land reclamation and the development of the people
Yeah,
of
man.
and saying
Which was
there are
done by
serious things,
both the Chinese and the Americans.
right? You know what I'm saying? It's it's
Yeah,
it's it's serious things
both
that going on.
parties got scuttled that land reform.
Mm,
And they're
Yeah.
moving together here, man. And they're moving together here, just like in America, where once you get one Chinese person in the neighborhood, they bring his whole community and set up shop, and the American government just lets them do it because it serves their interest. It's the same thing that you see happening here. We're people in America are being turned against China when China and America are in bed and been in bed. China is not the
And
revolutionary China of its origins. It's not that anymore. Neither is Russia. We're talking about capitalist, imperialist entities that are completely overriding the sovereignty of the world's indigenous peoples who remain unfree
yes,
and at
sir.
war.
Yes, sir.
well, you know what I see this as? Pick a corporation that sells poisonous products for you to eat or spray on your plants. Pick any corporation, right?
Hmm, hmm.
These are rivals within a corporation trying to battle to be CEO. You have China
Yes,
and
sir.
Russia on one side. You have the U.S. and the EU and the UK on the other side, right?
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
So they could be selling us bad hamburgers. They could be selling us GMO foods. They could be selling us poison
Hmm.
crop spray, right? They're battling to be the top of that corporation.
Definitely. Definitely.
So there's
And
times where
we're
they'll
busy
agree.
trying to figure out
Mhm.
which is best. We're busy trying to figure out which is best. Washington consensus or Beijing consensus.
Yeah, neither.
That's
But you know, if you're sitting at your desk in a corporation and you know that two managers hate each other,
yes, sir.
then you know you got to use your skills to play one off the other so you can benefit and get the biggest raise out of all of them. And
That's what.
to me that is where we sit.
That's
You
African
know,
consensus. That's what we call African
that's
consensus.
African consensus.
You know,
You know,
and go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
and you know, as evil as a man as Napoleon is, um, he had the occasional wise thing to say: never interrupt your enemy in the midst of them making a mistake.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
So
My
we just
good.
mm.
Sorry. Go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I'm done.
No, I was gonna say my
Yeah.
good brother Sang from the AAPRP said that under when it was World War II, Africans organized to overthrow colonialism. So in the midst of a
Hmm.
war such as this, which as much as I've said what I've just said, we do have to understand the significance of the possibility of America and Russia going to war is very significant for the world, right? Based upon the fact that they're two nuclear powers, right? So he was saying that in the midst of this conflict, Africa should be organizing to overthrow neocolonialism.
Hmm.
Yeah, and this is an issue that we tend not to be focusing on as much as we should be. Whilst we're busy instituting neoliberal politics, yeah, neoliberal politics is an arm of the neocolonial agenda. But I think
Yep.
it would be important for us to explore the relationship between, because what I love about your pronouncements, we've got Chief for the online right here now, where he said lights deaf on the place. It's good to have Chief
Yeah,
for the, you know.
man.
You know what I'm saying?
Greetings. It just
Live and direct. Live and
Yeah, you know,
direct.
came, man. Yeah,
as
man.
as good looking as I am, he's better looking than me. You know what I'm saying? So we have to have Chief on the, you know, on the line. You know what I'm saying? Live and direct. You know what I mean? So yeah, you know what I'm saying? All
Nah,
right.
man. That's all you, bro. That's all you. That's all
So
you, bro.
indeed. What's it called? But yeah, the relationship between politics and economics, brother Kwame and Chief on it, because your answers today have borne that to be true. We've spoken about a military conflict, and much of your answers have been centered around the issue of food, yeah, and resources, and how
Mhm.
this affects that issue, yeah. And so, can we really separate politics, governance from economics? And what is the folly of trying to do so?
Well, look at our folks here in the United States, because if you don't control your community, you can't control your politicians. We have plenty of black politicians in our cities here in the United States, and some of these cities are some of the worst in terms of poverty, worst run in terms of administration, and
Mhm.
our black politicians answer to the white oligarchs in these cities, or they
Yes,
answer
sir.
to Arab oligarchs in these cities, or they answer to Chinese oligarchs in these cities. So
Yes, sir.
if your first step should be to control the economics of your community, and that way, no matter what color the politician, they're answering to you. In economics, you can punish that politician for not
Mhm.
doing your bidding, and that's a mistake we've made.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I mean, and again, I reference the Hispanic community again, and granted, it's not a monolith. You have Mexicans, you have Puerto Ricans, you have Cubans, you have Guatemalans, you have all those sort of things, but they have really emphasized the ownership of businesses for control. Like
Mhm.
you could take. I have a friend who's a contractor, a road contractor in Houston, and the
Mhm.
minority contracting group is completely dominated by Mexicans now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Har-
Yes, sir.
hardly any Africans in there,
Mm,
right?
mm, mm.
But now that whole contracting group can now be used to lobby politicians to get contracts. Who's going to get the
Yes, sir.
contracts now? Will
Yes,
it be
sir. Yes, sir.
us?
Right, right, right. Understood. And my brother, on a broader scale, on an international scale, yeah, because in relation to that, Chief only raised a question earlier about the fact that Africans are trying to decide which one is our friend in this conflict. But part of the reasoning is that we haven't had the same colonial relationship with Russia, yeah, which is true.
Which is true. Yeah.
Is it? But so is it therefore wrong for us to recognize that as far as world geopolitics is concerned, that forces like NATO and the Euro-American white nationalist pan-European alliance are the principal forces, yeah, of neo-colonial domination, yeah, as far as African people are concerned right now, and to act accordingly. Is
Right now,
that an
yeah.
analysis?
Yeah, and I'll add some color to that.
Go ahead,
The
go ahead.
Because
No,
they're
no
on
pun
top
intended. No
right
pun
now.
intended.
Even the Yeah, no pun intended. Yeah. So, but that's because even though position is tenuous and is slipping, they are still somewhat on top right now, right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
But
sir.
if you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, which China is
Yes, sir.
selling as a ways for Africa to free itself, they have indebted a lot of African countries. And the deals
Right.
aren't the best deals. The deals aren't fair deals. And a lot of times, and I think there was an instance when Jamaica was supposed to get some aid from the Chinese, but in order to get the aid from the Chinese, Jamaica had to still submit the IMF requirements. So what is that telling you? So I mean,
Mm.
you
Good
know,
point, my brother. Good point. Excellent point. Go
so
ahead. Go ahead.
so I mean, if you take the old Who's on, meet the new boss, same as the old boss,
Yes, sir.
right?
Yes,
And
sir.
so this is what we have here now. Because you have rivalries, we have space to negotiate, and this is the way we should be looking at it. We should not be taking sides in terms of ideology, because neither ideology suits us, right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
But
sir. Yes, sir.
whichever side offers us the best deal and allows us to run our communities and countries as we see fit are the
Hmm.
sides that we should engage with business with.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Absolutely. Chief, funny, you got anything to add?
Well, I can hear you now. Actually, man, I had to go out and come back on. If you can go back just a
Okay.
little bit for me, I can catch up with you. Sorry, bro.
Oh no, I was asking brother Kwame about the reality of white nationalist pan-Europeanism being the chief architects of the neo-colonial policies that dominate um, our political and economic environment, and whether it's intelligent to identify them and those institutions as primary, as it stands right about now, understanding that China is not necessarily a friend, that Russia is not necessarily a friend, and as Papa Garvey said, don't believe that if the Chinese or the Japanese or the Russian get control of the world, they will do you any better than the rest of them. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. Don't
Exactly.
don't don't
Yeah,
don't, don't assume, right? But as it stands right now, yeah, the people that dominate the
Exactly.
IMF and the World Bank and the World Economic Forum and the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, these are European, Western nations, yeah, white people, and that we should be clear about that
Exactly.
in operating
yeah,
at the moment, whether that's intelligent analysis or not.
yeah. Well, that's
Well,
why I was saying.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that. Well, that's why I was saying about just reminding that. Yeah, even as COVID hit and we started talking about this global reset, at the same time, we African people, and I can only say this as a Garveyite. You understand? We have to return to our roots. We have to rehabilitate the institutions that we created to function as our own UN,
Yes.
our own government, and we need to also follow suit. I mean, do you know that the UNIA has so many chapters? Because it only takes 7 people to establish. You understand? It takes 7 people to establish a local division of the UNIACL, and you're connected to the other divisions, and you're able to swap information and resources. You understand? So I believe that we have to return to our own devices, to our own self governance. We really have to push um, explain to ourselves people what politics are. Political education is much needed. We think
Yep.
that politics is voting and supporting politicians, and we think that all around the world, and that's just the reality of it. Um, During our more revolutionary periods, our people understood that power could only come in mass, that we had to seize it, and it wasn't going to be voted for, that no oppressor was going to feel sorry for us and give us a reimbursement. That check is not coming, man. You understand? And we're running out of time and opportunity to seize. And so I believe that there's a um, rapid call for those who can understand what we're talking about here tonight. If you're not involved in any active Pan African organizations that's doing incredible work where you live and around the world where you want to be able to connect with, get involved.
Yes,
Kwame
sir.
Ture, he said organization, organization.
Yes,
You
sir.
know, we have to organize, organize, organize. And I think that now so much of our population has adopted neoliberal
Hmm.
capitalist values that
Hmm.
are also the byproduct of us being dominated by Western Europeans.
Yes, sir.
And
Yes, sir.
so it's part of our trauma. You know, when you think about it, we was having a good conversation just a few days ago with a sister, and she was saying that our people suffer from validation addiction, and it's
Yep.
real.
Mm.
We're still stuck where we're seeking to be validated first. We're still seeking permission to be. And that is what the biggest thing is. We have to return to these ideals that have already been trialed and tested to awaken our people in a state where we didn't have this technology, where we didn't have this level of literacy. We didn't even have the little bit of economic strength that we have now. The thing
Yes,
is
sir.
that we cannot look to the government and then say we understand what's happening in Africa. I lived here
Yes,
for
sir.
9 years. You cannot look at the Sierra Leone mainstream media and reports about it and
Yes,
understand
sir.
anything about the political situation on the ground,
Yes,
anything
sir.
about the economic situation on the ground. And
Yes,
you
sir.
asked a question earlier about politics and economics. When you were talking about these ism systems, they're political economies. They're not just a political system or economic system. They're economic systems that can only function on a certain set of political principles and values.
Yes,
Those are
sir.
white supremacist principles and values that are being imposed on people all around the world in the
That's
name
Yes,
right.
of
sir.
democracy. We talked about the IMF and the World Bank, talk about the
Yes, sir.
structural adjustment programs. Those are when they say, well, we're going to give you this money, but you're going to have to change your policies up a little bit in your country
Yes, sir.
before we give you more. And
Yes, sir.
these governments be like, man, run it in, because the truth of the matter is that the mass majority of these politicians in Africa come from families that also have a political heritage. And then you have the average people. We're looking at the politicians that we can name, but we're not looking at the permanent secretaries in the ministries. We're not looking at the corrupt officials in the civil service, the civil servants. I mean, you know, it's a complete meltdown of the African system. And the reality is that it's because our enemy system is melting down. And now is our time to make our move. And so for me, I would say, if you are black and you're proud, I don't care what your religion is. I only care about what your decision is. It's time for us to unify, put all differences to the side. I mean, focus on Ukraine and focus on Russia, but make sure it's from an African centered perspective that will give
Hmm.
you an understanding of where you should stand as a black man or woman in this world today in any political economic matter.
Hmm.
Yeah, and part of unifying is engaging in projects that improve the economy of your family and your neighbors. So, do something collectively where you're getting into, either some sort of cooperative. We all understand what a susu is, right? Things of that
Yeah,
nature, so we can uplift ourselves. I mean, we should focus on. This is the year that we should focus on developing assets that produce for us. If it's food,
absolutely.
if it's income, if it's all those sort of things. And the people that can produce are the ones that are going to be able to survive this next era. The European era is coming to an end.
Hmm.
Now,
Absolutely.
we have a choice. Are we going to be the top of the next era, or will it be somewhere else? Will it be someone else? Because if you were to ask me, India is poised, if Africans continue to sleep, to be number one. And I don't think the Indian is going to be any friendlier than the European.
No, it's not. It's not. You know, we have to.
Serious
I
business,
think we
boy.
really have to say that. You know, I'm a proud and patriotic, I would say, and we say race first. You know, but
Yep.
we have to understand class as well. There's a
Hmm.
deep and profound class struggle within the black community worldwide, and it's because some of us are being fooled by the propaganda of the enemy, and we're
Mm-hmm.
embracing their ideals. We've already been trained up since kindergarten all the way up to think like them, to think that in order to eat we have to go to the grocery store. You know, to think that fast food is okay. All these psychological, genocidal, trinkets that they put inside of our head that sabotage our thinking throughout our decision making. We really have to get aggressive about saving our young people.
Yes,
Oh
Our
sir.
young
yes.
people hold the future. Our young people hold the future, and I really beg and plead that those of us who do have knowledge, those of us who are elders and have wisdom, that we find a way to humble ourselves and
Hmm.
prioritize our young ones and give them what they need to succeed for the next 50, 60, 70 years now.
Yes, sir.
That's
Yes,
And
sir.
and to me,
I think that's what any responsible race or nation of people anywhere in the world will be doing with what's happening globally.
yeah, and I think the first step to that to save our young people is homeschooling, or at minimum Saturday schools, because we need to put in an African centered teaching. One, two, show them the proper application of mathematics and science so they can benefit the community. Science is not um, people in white coats at some far off university. Science is your grandmother giving you a herb to heal your flu. Your grandmother giving you herbs
Ashe.
to heal your cancer. Your grandfather looking at the stars and telling you what the weather is going to be tomorrow. Right? That's science. So
Hmm.
we need to reteach our youth that when your children come home, it is a debriefing. If they're going to the enemy schools, then you have to debrief them at the end of the day, and then put in the truth into them and have discussions back and forth. Teach them critical thinking skills. Um, what I would like to do in the future is to be able to have the income to have our to support young people having vocational skills. Because if you're
Oh
able to
yeah.
weld, if you're an electrician, if you're a carpenter, if you're a mason, if you can repair computers, you don't have to sit behind anybody's cubicle all day.
Hmm. Most definitely.
That's it,
And
bro.
it allows you to be more
That's
independent.
it.
And farming is the primary vocational skill.
Most
Hey, bro,
definitely.
listen. I've been involved in farming the last 5 years in Sierra Leone, bro, and it's put me into a way of thinking annually that I never had. I watch the
Yep.
rain seasons. I know when it's time to brush. I know, I know how much the seeds are on the market. I know how much it costs to get the farmers to work. You know
Yep.
that is not embarrassing. That's not exploiting them. You understand? I'm
Hmm.
learning how to produce food at that level. And last year we were able to produce 120 acres of food. It was very, very powerful.
Wow. That is powerful.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and so even right now, March 11th, I don't know if you know, but it's going to be the 230th commemoration since the founding of Freetown, and that founding happened as a consequence of those ancestors coming from the United States, by
Hmm.
way of Nova Scotia, and coming back in favoring Africa over America, and going to London and saying, "Yo, man, take us home," and this being
Yep.
the place that we were first brought back to and establish ourselves on the continent as Africans in the diaspora. We will be commemorating that here March 11th, but we'll also be opening a um, a uh, a health clinic and launching an international medical mission. We have two doctors here right now, and we're going to be taking them down to a couple of villages to do some visibility assessment So when they get back, they know what we need to do here. And so, Pan Africanism has to become more practical, like I see you
There
promoting.
you go.
It's very,
There you go.
very
That
important.
yep.
Yes,
hmm
sir. Yes, sir.
Functional Pan
It's very,
African.
very important that absolutely it has to happen, and
hmm
on every level, science, economics, and again, I can't even stop going back to the UNIACL because we focus on
More
personalities when we look back, but there were millions and millions of
millions.
ordinary
Yes.
Africans like me and you who
Yes,
hmm
sir.
understood that message and
Yes, sir.
heeded that call in the midst of
Yes, sir.
World War I, bro. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So
and and that's funny. That's what I emphasize to my children and other people who speak to me about the UNIA, because yes, you see Garvey at the top of the organization and Madame Demina, but it took millions of Africans to build the Negro Factories Corporation,
That's right.
which made their
that's
own
right.
clothes, which
That's right.
made records, which
That's right.
had dry cleaning stores, which had grocery stores, which had, and can you imagine the confluence of Africans it takes to buy 3 ships, even though the ships didn't work out?
That's right.
If you look at the price of those ships in 1920s dollars, right? Those
That's
ships
right.
are probably $50 million each today.
Yes, sir. Sir.
So I mean,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
that means that that, and what I hate now is a lot of black so-called academics saying, "Oh, the UNIA under Garvey was, their finances weren't transparent." You can't start a factories corporation or buy 3 major ships without transparent finances.
Yes, sir.
That
Yes,
didn't
sir.
come out.
You know what?
Nobody's
Hey,
stealing the
bro.
money if that's happening.
Hey,
But
bro.
go ahead.
You
Yeah.
know what? You know what? Let me tell you something, man. Gay Edgar Hoover was so frustrated because of the financial stability
hmm
and the expansion and the fact that people could take the ideal and apply it anywhere they was at as long as they was
Exactly.
black and
Yes,
and
sir.
and, and
Exactly.
it would constitute a counterattack against neoliberal capitalist imperialism in the form of
Yes.
colonialism
Yes,
Yep.
sir.
anywhere. And so we got to
Yes.
revisit Garveyism and
Most
give it
definitely.
its revolutionary proper interpretation because
Yes.
it
Yes.
Garvey was a philosopher. That means
Yes,
that
sir.
he was a man of vision that seen things that wasn't happening yet. And so when you
Exactly.
realize that what's happening is that he planted a seed that is only coming to fruition now in this generation under these circumstances and conditions. And
Yes,
so
sir.
what I see is that we have all of the perfect conditions to
hmm
make what Garvey envisioned the reality, but we have to embrace Garveyism as the political economy because it
Yes,
wasn't
sir.
just
Yes,
the
and
UNIA, it also
particularly
was
the
the African.
mechanisms of Garveyism.
It,
Yep.
yes, because
Yes.
it wasn't just a UNIA government,
No.
but it was an African Communities League, and that African Communities League was our economy. And you got to
Yep.
Yes, sir.
understand that Garvey opposed capitalism and communism. He had
He
no
did.
picks.
Yes, sir.
Exactly.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So
And that's where
that's the
I stand.
seed.
And then and
That's the
then
seed of the African economy.
yes,
and
sir.
and,
Yes.
and let's take history,
Sorry,
right?
Brother Kwame. Before you get to your point, I want you to go into this. What you said, the mechanisms of Gravism. I need you to extemporize on that.
Well, how did they collectively put their money together to have these
Mm,
big projects? What was the
yes, sir.
process?
Yes, sir.
Where
Yes,
was
sir.
the money put at? Was it put in the banks? The banks were failing at that time in the
Yes, sir.
in the 1920s.
Yes, sir.
How did they ensure trust among each other?
Yes, sir.
What was the
Yes, sir.
process of building trust among each other?
Yes,
Right?
sir.
How, and then you build trust by holding each other accountable. So,
Yes,
what were the mechanisms to hold each other accountable? Right?
yes, sir.
And Brother Fode mentioned it kind of at the beginning of the show, but
Mhm.
there were ways they dealt with traders very well in the UNIA.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The brothers were trained, the sisters were
Oh
trained,
yeah. Oh yeah.
big time, big time. And I'm going to leave it at that. But they took those mechanisms. A young man in the UNIA during that time period took those mechanisms, and a little boy whose parents were secretaries in the UNIA took those mechanisms and created the Nation of Islam.
Mhm.
And you look at the power the Nation of Islam had in Harlem; it was
Yes.
due to the economic hold that they had over Harlem. The police wouldn't mess with the FOI during that time period. They messed with one,
And,
and you saw what happened.
Yes, sir.
and you,
Yes, sir.
and you know what? And you know what? There also was a great migration happening at that time, and our people was coming from a rural setting to an urban setting and bringing
Yep.
traditional ideals and applying it to a new set of circumstances. And when you
That's the
understand
key.
that,
Hmm.
you realize that that's what we have to be able to do now at the global level, not from
Yep.
region to region, but globally. We have to now release our black political economy on the world. Our economy is anchored on our philosophy of the world, which is not the
Yep.
same as anyone else's.
Sorry, my brothers. I do. I don't want to neglect the chat. Although there's only two people in it at the moment, Baba Senghor and Brother Coffee. I don't. I didn't because, like I said, Brother Coffee would take you off into a whole capitalist reasoning exclusively. So, and we were dealing with other issues. That's why I wasn't getting into it. But we're talking about Garvey now, and this idea that apparently you all don't read Garvey because where did Marcus Garvey oppose capitalism? And this is a topic, really a topic for it.
Where did he oppose capitalism? That's what he's asking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And apparently,
Well,
sorry, my brother, because
I can, I can answer that.
so
I can
can I.
answer that.
But
go ahead. Yep.
apparently, the UNIA was a private organization, so that is privatization in the capitalist sense, as far as
Okay.
Brother
Can
Coffee.
I please reply to this?
And,
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
also
Go ahead.
yeah, I'm coming to you. And there was also some talk about what was it, free market economy, free trade, promotion of free, as though the opposite of free trade as it is currently defined is unfree trade, right? You know what I'm saying? So as though what they call free trade is in fact free trade. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, that's
No,
not.
well, if the U.S. is sending subsidized farm goods to Ghana, and they're telling Ghana not to
Not
subsidize their farming inputs to Sierra Leone, that is
Mhm.
not free or fair trade. There's no
Sure.
reciprocity in that.
In whatsoever. All right, so that's we've knocked that out of the way.
Yep.
Let's do,
Hey,
go ahead for it. On the Garvey point.
well,
On the
well,
Garvey point.
well,
Yeah.
I'll say this in terms of the Garvey point. Um,
Yes, sir.
Garvey may not have said I openly oppose capitalism,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
but if you examine the political economy that he envisioned, you realize
Yes, sir.
that if we were able to realize that and manifest that, it would be opposed by capitalism and opposed to capitalism. We're talking about building an African economy, and that's what Garvey was doing. Now, in terms of it being a registered entity and things like that, those are formalities, but that does not change the outcome of the 1920 International Convention, through which the UNIA, as a registered organization, facilitated 20,000 Africans from around the world voting a flag. That wasn't a
Yes, sir.
company. That was 20,000 Africans. You
Yes, sir.
understand?
Exactly.
Electing to create a provisional government for all of the race,
Mm-hmm.
and a flag and a constitution and all of these
Mm-hmm.
things. This was 20 to 25,000 people in Harlem in
Mm.
1920. It's now 1922. So what I'm saying is that you have to begin to view Garveyism outside of the context of white imperialism. You have to begin to
That's right.
understand that the seeds of Garveyism planted the anti-colonialist fire that Kwame Nkrumah took back to Ghana and
Exactly.
set it off with. You know, he inspired Jomo Kenyatta and never stepped foot in Africa. So we got to
Yep.
understand that we're talking about a spirit. We're talking about a consciousness that when
Yeah.
you take it and you apply it, it has nothing to do with capitalism or any other ism other than what we have failed to define as us.
The,
Yes, sir.
the South African Pan African Congress was started by former UNIA members,
Yes, sir.
and if you look at Garvey's essay, "The Ideal State," he mentions specifically in there
Yes,
that
sir. Yes,
if
sir.
you had in 1920s dollars above a couple million bucks,
Yes, sir.
you would no longer be able to have any wealth above that, because he did not want that person in the ideal government exercising control over the state.
Yes, yes, sir.
That is the opposite of
Capital.
crony capitalism.
Yes, Yes, sir.
The United States
bro,
and Britain and the UK and France are crony capitalist countries.
Yes, sir.
bro. Listen, man. We talking about the height of lynching. We talking about the
Yes.
Red Summer of 1919. We talking about a very, very dangerous time. And the way that the UNIA ACL came up with a political economy to sustain our people at that time, where there was these world Spanish flus and all this other stuff, was based on their understanding that they had already developed under their conditions. We can use all of that now and apply it to this technology, apply it to this
I agree
crypto,
because the
apply it to
conditions are
this,
somewhat
this.
easier than the conditions are easier than back then,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah,
And and, and
and not to get too much into UNIA history, if you want to go there, fine. But it was because of the UNIA that lynching decreased dramatically in the United States. If you read Theodore Vincent's Black Power in the Garvey movement,
and the government movement.
Garvey made a speech called "Press the Button."
Yes,
He
sir.
basically says, anytime one of our people are lynched, we are going to press the button,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Lynching dropped the next year after that. And what people don't realize in the United States, to this day, there has been no anti-lynching bill signed.
Yes.
You know, when you
Yes.
go to high school,
Absolutely.
they tell you, oh, they talk about the dire anti-lynching bill. They never tell you it was never passed,
Yes, sir.
right?
Yes.
So the UNIA armed themselves and made sure lynching did not take hold. So they created space for us. The little space that we have as Africans in these white countries now is because of the wind of what Garvey and the members, should
That's
I
right.
say, of the UNIA did.
Yes, sir.
You
Yes,
That's
know,
right.
sir.
and
That's right.
I'll refer to you to another book called Grassroots Garvey Movement, which talks about the UNIA's organizing down south under the conditions of lynching and how those communities organize themselves. They were doing military drills in the park in Miami back in the day,
Most definitely.
Mm-hmm.
right?
But brother, let me jump to the answer.
Sakura.
Just very quickly. Let me just jump into
Sorry.
the
Yeah.
things. No, no. I just want to because there's so much that can be said on this point in relation to Garvey and capitalism, and we will do that another day. Trust me, we will go into it, look at that properly, right? But there's two things that we have to understand here. Papa Garvey and the UNIA and every Black nationalist liberation movement is operating
Yes, sir.
within the context of a broader white supremacist and white nationalist pan-European economic system. So Garveyism is about creating collective wealth among African people, private in relation to the dominant system of colonialism, etc., etc., etc. So we want to protect our wealth among each other, but we share the wealth among each other. And when you look at the policies of the UNIA, which one of them was the fact that no individual can own the property of the UNIA, the corporations of the UNIA. Yeah. What you mentioned already, Brother Kwame, in terms of the fact that in the ideal state, private wealth can only be a certain amount. Beyond that, everything else must belong to what? The state.
The
Not
state.
me
Yep.
speaking. Papa Garvey said this. If you look at his PPP program and his anti-colonial program in Jamaica, it was about taking control of the levers of the state for land redistribution was one of them, yeah, and the redistribution of the wealth to the masses of the people. This is what he was saying, and finally, I'm gonna we could go in on this, yeah, but
Yeah.
he says
Yeah.
in this was a Negro World article, and I'm forgetting the year. I'll remind you of the year in a second. But he says, remember, the Black Star Line Steamship Corporation is not a private company. The ships that are owned by this corporation are the property of the Negro race.
Yes.
And so we're not talking about a political economy that is built upon private ownership or individual private ownership. We're talking about the development of a political economy that is built upon the collective ownership of wealth in the hands of African people, exclusive to the system of global European, Western, American domination and colonization.
Cooperative economics.
Cooperative
That's
economics.
what the UNIA was. And
That's it.
the way their stock system was set up no matter how much stock you owned, if I
Yes.
owned 500 shares or I owned 1 share, you had equal votes in
Yes,
that
sir.
organization.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You know,
Yeah.
so
So that was a legal Road article from May 1920, by the way.
wow.
Where he said
Yep.
that. Yeah.
And you know, and I always tell people time and time again, the game plan was written for us years ago. All we
Sorry,
have to
sorry,
do is
Brother Kwame.
execute.
One more thing. In Message to the People, which was written near the end of his life, 1930, 7,
37.
1938,
Yep.
he describes the capitalist system as ruthless and bad.
There
Yeah.
you go.
So
There you go.
if he's not going to try to institute a ruthless and bad system, although he did believe that there were some strategic benefits within that
Of
system
course.
based
Of
upon our
course.
relative position right about now, which
Exactly.
that is actually a fact. But the idea that he's going to institute in the ideal state a ruthless and bad economic system or political economic system doesn't make any sense.
Not at
So,
all.
No.
Not at all. So it's crazy because it seems as if Garvey is more popular than he is studied. The
Yes.
UNIA, the UNIA. Sometimes I say UNIA, people say, "What is that?" I say Marcus Garvey. They be like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I know Garvey." And it's almost like we can no longer allow personalities to overshadow the masses. Garvey
No.
was committed to the masses. Garvey wasn't being paid for his position. Garvey sacrificed his ideals and his money as well in the process of building what he knew our race needed.
Hmm.
So the reality is that Garveyism constituted a black revolution, a
yeah,
global black revolution. And that's why it had to be put out from within the citadel of imperialism itself, New Rome, United States of America.
Yep.
We have to really narrate this story correctly so that we can stop running to religious books to understand where to draw our inspiration from.
And and in regards to the European world at war, look who Garvey was dealing with outside of our race internationally. He was talking to Irish liberationists. He was talking to Chinese liberation. He was talking to all sorts because he was basically navigating the in between space
yes,
with
Bro,
these
listen,
European
bro,
powers at war,
listen.
right? Which is a
He
smart
wasn't
thing to do.
he wasn't just talking to them. I mean, they were inspired by him. Ho Chi Minh, while he
There you
was in
go.
New York City,
Hmm.
was influenced by. He went to UNIA meetings,
Yep.
and he was influenced by Marcus Garvey. And if you look, even though Vietnam was a communist revolution,
Hmm.
they had a yellow flag, a yellow star. They turned their
Wow.
star into their complexion, just
Exactly.
just, just like Nkrumah did, turn it to our
Yep.
complexion. So
Yep.
you gotta understand that there's always been a fight within all of these isms, whether it's capitalism or socialism, for by our people to get more of our liberty from that system, because
so,
Well,
that's what we're fighting.
yeah, and
Chief
here's the
Butler.
irony. There's an interesting book called Tribes by Joel Cocken. I need to give you the subtitle to that.
The
But it's basically,
one second. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah. And towards the end of Tribes, it's how race identity, how race, religion, identity determines success, right? And in the epilogue
Sorry,
of Tribes,
to be fuller, he says determine success in the new global economy. Yeah.
there you go. Thank you. Thank you. And so if you look at the last chapter, I believe he mentions Garvey and Malcolm X in there. And Joe Cotton basically says other ethnic groups took that game plan and ran with it. The Indians, the Chinese, you name it. The Japanese, they ran with Garvey's plan. Now, who are the people that aren't running with that plan?
Yes,
Us.
sir. Yes, sir. Most
So the rest of the world has risen, if you go back to 1960 in terms of economies, African economies were considered stronger and more advanced than the Asian economies in 1960.
definitely.
I mean, you could
Mhm.
say Nkrumah practiced Garveyism with all the corporations that he built up in Ghana, the state-owned corporations. But since then, it's dropped off. Black businesses, blacks had a higher percentage of business ownership than whites in the United States in the early 1900s.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
again, we have our desire for validation had us giving up our birthright. And something I tell to a lot of people, if you look at Black Wall Street in Tulsa, and I always ask them the question, what destroyed Black Wall Street? And the first answer everybody gives you is, oh, they bombed Black Wall Street and that it was destroyed um, by white bombing and white military action. I said no, because Black Wall Street rebuilt stronger than before after the bombing.
Mm-hmm.
It's in this book
Yeah,
called
yeah.
Afro-American Entrepreneurship and Self-Help by John Sibley Butler, right?
Mm-hmm.
They had more businesses after the bombing than before the bombing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what destroyed Black Wall Street?
Mm-hmm.
Integration.
That's right.
All we got to do is take the game plan and run with it. And this is the ideal time now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I'm feeling like we're drawing towards a natural conclusion. Here. We've been on for over 2 hours, so we don't have to get too long. We want people to watch
Yeah.
it back.
Great
It's been about,
conversation.
and
It's a
we've
great
been
one.
all over the place. But this is important because we cannot just come here and have a conversation and break down Russia and Ukraine and whatever without having a mission and a mode of operating for us in today's world and what we need to be focused on as African people. And I think with the leadership of Brother Kwame Pianki in this conversation, we have certainly done that in terms of focusing on food reproduction and control of our resources, and Chief Fode emphasizing the grassroots need, yeah, for us to organize around those agendas, and the fact that the UNIA ACO is doing that work. There are a number of comments which we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but in the sense that, sorry, I'm laughing, Chief Fode, at this one because he says, quote Papa Garvey in the school of African philosophy on capitalism, and I just
I
want
don't
to let
know
brothers.
what.
I know what he's
Yeah,
referring
I
to.
don't know what.
I just want to know. I just want to let people know that on the panel right now, you have two graduates of the school. Yeah, on the panel right now, myself and Chief Fode are graduates of the School of African Philosophy. Yeah, so
Yeah.
let's just make that very clear. You know what I'm saying? And well, Coffee wants us to bring him on so he can refute us on Garveyism. We're gonna have to do that another day, Robert Coffee. Yeah, we'll do that another
Yeah,
day.
we're not going to entertain. We're not going to entertain that.
Yeah,
Well, Kofi, I think that Kofi could send an email or something like that with his rebuttals, and we can deal with it like that. But there's no way you're just going to jump on the show and make a disruption. The purpose for this show is to get our people very valuable information that you can use or
right.
not use. And the reality is that however you feel about Garvey or his opinion of his personal economics, we're ultimately talking about the UNIACL and what's best for the black race.
Yes, sir.
And just to why I got the mic real fast, I want to say thank you very much, brother Kwame. You came
Yes, sir.
through and blessed the Fort March. That's what we represent.
Yep.
Definitely would love to see you, touch base with the UNIACL, see what we got going on over there.
Yeah, I would like to do that for sure.
With
Yep.
yeah, man. We have a great team of elders with over 200 years of experience themselves within the parent body, and we have myself. I serve as the West African ambassador, and Brother Shaka Rai, the cultural ambassador. We have ambassadors representing this body. Now, many of our people don't take it serious anymore, but we know that it's a real thing, and that
Yes, sir.
now is the time for us to be rehabilitating this machine. Like you said, we need mechanisms in place. So, I want to extend an invite to you, definitely live and direct,
I
because
appreciate
we
that.
need more. We need more from you. We need more of your analysis.
Yes, sir.
Reason why we create this platform is so that we can find the missing voices from the discussion. You understand?
I
And
understand for
and bring
sure.
you for and bring you forward for the people. But beyond this, we're really involved in a lot of other critical things as well that can impact communities, even where you are.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes, my brother, and your voice, like I said, I wasn't gassing you. I consider you to be the one of the most erudite political scientists, yeah,
Oh,
of
I
our era.
appreciate that. I quite
And
appreciate that.
I'm not. There's no exaggeration within that. Your capacity to stay on top of information and contextualize it for our people is a mighty resource. Yeah, and so no doubt when that resource on forward march in the future and in many other formats, yeah, towards
Well, I'm
more organizational efforts. Go ahead.
yeah, and I'm honored to be in the company of two mighty minds like you brothers
Yes,
there.
sir. Yes,
I
sir.
mean,
Yes,
you
sir.
know, our people are in good hands
Yes, sir.
with two minds of yours and the heart you have to
Yes, sir.
produce for our folks, basically. So
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Medasi,
Thank you.
give Baba Sengo's in the building. Again, I just want to say that Baba Sengo is the man that trained us in the School of African Philosophy, and he was also trained by Baba Charles L. James and graduated in the School of African Philosophy.
from
And
Detroit.
yep,
Yep.
Charles L. James from Detroit, and Charles L. James was taken through the School of African Philosophy by Marcus Garvey himself. Yeah,
That's right.
so
Mhm.
I'm
And
just pointing out the line.
and
Yeah, the line. Go
and
ahead.
he also served as a president general, and so did Baba Senghor. And Baba Senghor right now is the first assistant president general of the
Yes, sir. Yes,
Rehabilitating Committee 2020,
yes, sir.
which we serve on.
Yes, sir.
Good.
Yes, sir. So yeah, so we want to make that clear, and we're just pointing it out for the sake of the conversation. Another day, we might do a session where we delve deeper into the economic philosophy of Garveyism and the UNAACL, and all challenges. I welcome all challengers. Yeah, come get doppy on that session there. Yeah, anybody can come and get it. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Cause we know this is a born and raised Garvey. Yeah, we know where I talk about. I will not beg no friend when it comes to them thing there. All right. So thank you very much, brother Kwame Pianki. But people, I think the
Thank you,
message today
brothers.
is hear all, yeah, but attend only to that which concerns you. Do not get so caught up on Russia and Ukraine that we forget ourselves. We forget that we are African people with our own intentions, with our own goals, with our own work to do on behalf of ourselves. We cannot just become lost sheep loitering in the political interests of other people. We have our own interests, yeah? And so our own Pan-African, universal African nationalist goals must be primary, whatever the situation, whatever the political climate, whatever the circumstance, whatever the events we are analyzing right
Yes,
about now,
sir.
we must put our race first, yeah? And so we've done that today, and we want to once again give thanks to brother Kwame Pianki for aiding us in the process. And no doubt you're going to see him again. Please follow us on all social media. Basani, say at Basani, 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 with the Black Star Action Network International, Basani Forward March. Yeah, at Basani Forward March. Yeah. And
Oh yeah, and also you can also tap into the website www.bsani.org as well
yes, sir.
for regular updates.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We got to do a session, Chief, on there at some point, where we just delve into the programs that we currently have on stream.
Yes, I would
Let
love to hear that. I would love to
yeah,
hear
you
that.
know what I'm saying? Because you touched on it today, Chief, on there, but I'm sure the people would love to hear more about that, and we can go in properly on another day. All right. So, kings and queens, as the prophet himself said, race first, one God, one aim, one destiny.
One God,
Rise.
one aim, one destiny.
That's right. Rise, you mighty
Let's
African,
go.
for you can
Up,
accomplish
you mighty
whatever
race.
up you might erase.